My father gave my younger brother the promotion I had worked 12 years to earn. Then handed him the microphone and said, "Some people build systems. Leaders build companies." Everyone in the ballroom turned toward me when he said it. They knew I was the person who had built the system, keeping Caldwell Freight alive. My brother Ryan smiled from the stage in a new Navy suit, accepting the title of Chief Operating Officer, while the software dashboard I designed glowed on a 40-foot screen behind him. Then he thanked our father, thanked the board, thanked 3 consultants who had joined the company 6 months earlier, and called my work a useful technical foundation. I did not interrupt him. I did not cry. I waited until he announced that my position had been eliminated. Then I opened my phone and checked the licensing agreement he had never bothered to read. The event was supposed to celebrate Caldwell Freight's 30th anniversary. My father had rented the grand ballroom of the Franklin Hotel in Columbus, Ohio, invited our biggest customers, and filled the room with banners claiming we were entering a new era of intelligent logistics. Every banner displayed RootCore, the routing and compliance platform I had created after our company nearly collapsed 7 years earlier. RootCore reduced missed deliveries, tracked driver hours, flagged dangerous maintenance gaps, and saved the company from losing its 2 largest medical supply contracts. Effortless loved telling investors that Caldwell Freight had become a technology-driven company. He simply avoided mentioning that the technology belonged to his daughter. Before I continue, if your family has ever praised your work while giving someone else your chair, you will understand why I stayed quiet that night. I had been the dependable daughter since I was 16. Ryan was the charming son. When he dropped out of business school, Dad said he was entrepreneurial. When I completed a master's degree in systems engineering while working full-time, Dad said I had always been good with computers. When Ryan lost $180,000 launching a luxury delivery division nobody requested, the company absorbed the loss. When RootCore saved more than $4 million in 1 year, Dad gave me a plaque that said, Employee Innovation Award. I was 41 years old when I finally stopped confusing usefulness with respect. Ryan continued his speech while I sat at the family table beside my aunt and 2 board members who could no longer meet my eyes. RootCore was created here at Caldwell Freight, he said, gesturing toward the screen. It belongs to this family, and under my leadership, we'll license it across the industry. The room applauded. That sentence mattered more than the promotion. Ryan was not merely taking credit. He was publicly claiming ownership and promising investors he could sell a product he did not own. RootCore had not been created as a Caldwell Freight employee project. 7 years earlier, when Dad refused to fund new software, I built the first version at night, using my own equipment and money. I formed Mercer Systems LLC under my mother's maiden name, registered the source code, and licensed the platform to Caldwell Freight for a minimal annual fee because I wanted to save the family business. My father signed the agreement without reading it carefully. Ryan had probably never seen it. They believed that because I worked inside the building, everything inside my head automatically belonged to them. Then Ryan's presentation changed slides. My photograph appeared beside the words, Organizational Transition. He smiled at me from the stage. Elena has contributed a great deal in a technical capacity, but growth requires a different leadership culture. Effective tonight, her role as Director of Operations Technology will be discontinued. A few guests looked down at their plates. Others watched me with the uncomfortable fascination people reserve for public accidents. My father remained seated at the head table, his hands folded, letting Ryan humiliate me in front of employees, clients, and relatives. Ryan added, "We've offered Elena a generous consulting transition, but she has always struggled with change." The first Ryan, that was a lie. No offer had been made. No meeting had happened. He had fired me publicly before giving me a letter. I stood, smoothed my black dress, and said, "May I see the transition agreement?" Ryan laughed lightly into the microphone. "This is not the time for legal details." I looked toward my father. "Did the board approve the termination?" Dad finally spoke. "Elena, don't make a scene. Tonight is about the future." I nodded once. "That answers my question." Ryan's smile tightened. "Security can collect your company laptop tomorrow," I said. "The laptop belongs to Mercer Systems." He glanced toward Dad, then back at me. "Everything you developed for Caldwell Freight belongs to Caldwell Freight." I could hear the confidence in his voice. It was not knowledge. It was inheritance. Ryan had spent his whole life assuming that anything useful near him would eventually become his. I opened the Route Core licensing agreements on my phone. Section 11.4 was still there, unchanged since Dad signed it 7 years earlier. Termination of the licensor's active operational role without cause triggered a 72-hour suspension of administrative access, followed by license termination unless both parties entered a new written agreement. I had added that clause because, even then, some part of me knew my father valued the system more than the woman maintaining it. My phone buzzed with an email from Human Resources. Attached was a termination letter dated that afternoon. The reason stated organizational restructuring. At the bottom was Ryan's electronic signature as Chief Operating Officer, although the board vote approving his appointment had occurred less than 20 minutes earlier. He had prepared my termination before he legally held the title used to authorize it. Then, a second email arrived from Route Corps' automated contract monitor. Leadership separation detected. License review window initiated. Administrative access expires in 71 hours, 58 minutes. So I looked up at the ballroom screen. Ryan was showing investors a live map of 214 trucks moving across 6 states. He called it his company's most valuable asset. My father raised a glass to him. The audience applauded again. Neither of them understood that the countdown had already started. As I walked toward the ballroom doors, Ryan called after me through the microphone. "Elena, don't be dramatic. We're still family." I turned around and looked at the software glowing behind him. Then you should have read the family contract," I said. My father's smile disappeared first. Oh, I drove home without calling anyone. By the time I reached my apartment, Ryan had already sent a company-wide email announcing his first decisive leadership action. He described my termination as a necessary step toward modernization and thanked me for my years of technical support. 12 years of rebuilding routes, negotiating compliance standards, training dispatch teams, and keeping medical shipments moving through winter storms had been reduced to the phrase people used for resetting passwords. I read the email twice, saved it as a PDF, and forwarded it to my attorney, Naomi Pierce. Then I opened Route Corps' audit dashboard and watched Ryan begin making mistakes in real time. The system showed 3 new administrator access requests, all submitted under Ryan's account. He tried to add his college friend Mason as Chief Technology Officer, grant an outside consulting firm permission to view source-level data, and remove Mercer Systems from the emergency contact list. Every request failed because his permissions did not include ownership controls. Ryan had the keys to the office, but not the vault. At 10:14 p.m., he had read again using my old employee credentials. The login failed and triggered an automatic security alert. I took a screenshot. 40 seconds later, he called. I let it ring once before answering. What? His voice was tight. Why can't I update the administrator list? I looked at the dashboard. Because you are not the administrator. He exhaled sharply. Elena, do not play games. I need full access before tomorrow's investor briefing. Then request it through Mercer Systems. He went quiet. You mean through you? Yes. He laughed, but there was no humor in it. Dad was right. You built this whole thing to control us. I said, No, Ryan. I built it because Dad refused to pay for software. I protected it because neither of you respects what you do not understand. He lowered his voice. You're still under a confidentiality agreement. I almost admired the confidence. So are you. He ignored that. If you interfere with company operations, we will sue you. I opened the licensing agreement again. RouteCore is operating exactly as contracted. Your decision triggered the review window. My decision, he snapped. You were fired because you became impossible. I said, Then the company should be comfortable operating without me. He hung up. Naomi called at 10:30. She had represented Mercer Systems for 4 years and never once confused family drama with business law. I read the license, she said. The termination provision is clear. They have 72 hours to negotiate a continuation or lose administrative access. Basic operational functions can remain temporarily available for safety, but they cannot expand, sublicense, modify, or represent ownership. I looked at the moving truck icons on my screen. Ryan promised investors he would license RouteCore across the industry. Then he publicly promised something he has no right to sell. Naomi paused. Do you want to shut them down? No, I said. I want the contract followed. That distinction mattered. I was not sabotaging Caldwell Freight. I was refusing to keep protecting it for free. The next morning, my father called at 6:12. He always called early when he wanted obedience to feel urgent. Come to the office, he said. No greeting, no apology. We need to straighten this out before the investors arrive. I poured coffee and said, Send me a written proposal. You are not negotiating with your family through lawyers. Ryan fired me in front of 300 people. Dad sighed as if I were exhausting him. He handled it badly, I'll admit that. But you embarrassed him by challenging him on stage. I stared out the window. Dad, he announced he owns my software. It's company software. No, it is licensed software. His voice hardened. Do not hide behind technical language, I said. Ownership is not technical language. He tried guilt next. Your mother would be ashamed to see you hold the company hostage. That sentence used to break me. My mother had died when I was 29, and Dad had spent 12 years using her memory like a key. But RouteCore existed because of her. Mercer was her maiden name. She was the one who taught me to keep copies, read every page, and never let love erase ownership. Mom would have read the contract, I said, and ended the call. At 8:05, the company's outside counsel emailed Naomi requesting an emergency meeting. The message claimed Caldwell Freight held an implied ownership interest because RootCore had been substantially developed using company operational knowledge. Naomi replied with the signed license, the source code registration, the original development invoices, and 7 years of payments from Caldwell Freight to Mercer Systems. The payments were embarrassingly small because I had given my father a family rate, but they proved the relationship clearly. Owners do not pay annual license fees to themselves. By noon, Ryan had moved from panic to public performance. He posted a video on the company's internal platform saying an angry former employee was attempting to disrupt operations after being passed over for leadership. He told employees there was no risk and said his new technology team had complete control. 10 minutes later, Mason tried to push an unauthorized software update. RouteCore rejected it and automatically restricted his account. Then Ryan made the mistake Naomi had predicted. He sent our 3 largest clients a letter assuring them Caldwell Freight owned RouteCore in perpetuity and that no third party could affect access. His electronic signature appeared at the bottom. Dad was copied. So was the board. One of those clients was North Star Medical Distribution, which relied on RootCore to coordinate temperature-sensitive deliveries to hospitals. Their compliance director, Evelyn Shaw, called me directly. Elena, Ryan says the company owns the system. Our contract says Mercer Systems is the technology licensor. Which is true, I answered carefully. Your contract is accurate. RootCore remains licensed under the existing terms. Safety functions are active, but Caldwell Freight's administrative rights are under review because of a triggering event. Evelyn was silent. Should we be concerned? Not about today's deliveries, but you should ask Ryan to provide the ownership documents supporting his letter. At 2:17 p.m., Ryan forwarded me Evelyn's request with one line. Fix this. I replied, I do not work for you anymore. Very no. 3 minutes later, another message arrived, this time from Dad. It contained a scanned intellectual property assignment dated 4 years earlier. The document claimed I had transferred all RootCore rights to Caldwell Freight for $1. My name appeared at the bottom. The signature was not mine. Aman. I zoomed in and saw the date. It was the same week I had been in Seattle, sitting beside my mother's sister during emergency heart surgery. Ryan had chosen a time when I was out of state and emotionally distracted. He probably thought that made the lie safer. Instead, it gave me hospital records, flight receipts, and 40 people who could prove exactly where I had been. I forwarded the assignment to Naomi. Her reply came less than a minute later. Do not contact them. This changes everything. The forged assignment changed the problem from a family betrayal into a documented fraud. Until that moment, Ryan could still pretend he misunderstood the license. Dad could still call it a disagreement over what belonged to the company. But a backdated intellectual property transfer with my name copied onto it was not confusion. It was intent. Naomi told me to preserve the original email, download the attachment without altering its metadata, and say nothing while she contacted a digital document examiner. Let them keep using it, she said. Every time they rely on a false document, they strengthen the case against themselves. By 9 o'clock the next morning, Ryan had already sent the forged assignment to North Star Medical, 2 investors, and the board's outside counsel. He attached a message saying, "This conclusively resolves any ownership questions." That sentence would have been funny if it had not been so reckless. The document examiner called Naomi before noon with 3 immediate findings. The PDF had been created only 11 days earlier, not 4 years earlier as the date claimed. The signature image had been lifted from a routine vendor approval I signed 6 years ago, and the author field in the file metadata listed Mason Burke, Ryan's newly appointed technology officer. Ryan had not just used a forgery. He had allowed his best friend to manufacture it. I spent that morning building a clean evidence timeline. First, the original Mercer Systems formation documents. Then, the route core source code registration. Then, the signed license agreement. 7 years of licensing payments. And the termination letter that triggered the 72-hour review. Finally, I added Ryan's public speech, his client letter falsely claiming perpetual ownership, the forged assignment, and the metadata report showing when it was created. By lunchtime, the story was no longer emotional. It was chronological. Dad called 3 times. I did not answer. Ryan called once, then sent a message. We are offering you 6 months' salary to sign a clean transfer and stop disrupting the company. I stared at it for a moment, then forwarded it to Naomi. The offer told us everything. If they truly believed they owned RootCore, they would not need me to sign a transfer now. At 1:40 p.m., North Star Medical sent Caldwell Freight a formal notice demanding proof of software rights by the next morning. Their compliance director copied me and Naomi. The letter said any material misrepresentation involving RootCore could trigger suspension of North Star's 5-year delivery contract. That contract represented almost 30% of Caldwell Freight's annual revenue. Ryan replied within 20 minutes, promising a live ownership and technology demonstration at the investor meeting scheduled for Friday. The problem was that Ryan could not demonstrate what he did not understand. The route core was not just a map with colored truck icons. It contained compliance logic, weather rerouting, fuel risk modeling, maintenance alerts, and a medical chain protocol designed around North Star's temperature requirements. Ryan knew how to point at the dashboard. He did not know how the system made decisions. Mason understood more code than Ryan, but not the architecture. They had spent years treating me like the person who maintained a machine they believed belonged to them. Now they had promised investors they could open the engine. That afternoon, an operations manager named Talia called me from her personal phone. She had worked beside me for 8 years and was one of the few people at the anniversary event who looked angry instead of uncomfortable. "Elena," she said, "Ryan is telling everyone you planted a shutdown command." I looked at the active dashboard. There is no shutdown command. The license review is restricting administrative access exactly as written. Talia lowered her voice. He asked me to change the incident logs so it looks like you accessed the system after termination. I sat straighter. Did you? No. I told him the logs are immutable. She paused. Then Mason asked for a screenshot instead. I told her not to take risks for me and to preserve any written requests. 10 minutes later, she forwarded an email from Ryan. Update the access summary to reflect Elena Mercer's unauthorized interference. We need a clean record for investors. Beneath it, Mason had replied, I can recreate the report manually if necessary. Another shovel. Another hole. The 72-hour window was due to expire at 8:14 the following evening, 30 minutes before the investor demonstration. The timing was almost elegant. Caldwell Freight would retain basic routing and safety functions, so trucks were not endangered. But leadership dashboards, expansion controls, source-level access, and sub-licensing tools would enter restricted mode. Ryan could still move freight. What he could not do was show investors the national expansion package he had promised. Naomi and I agreed not to attend unless invited by a client, board member, or counsel. We were not going to crash a meeting and give Ryan another chance to call me unstable. By sunset, the invitation arrived from Evelyn Shaw at North Star Medical. Her email was direct. Because Mercer Systems is identified in our contract as the licensor, we request Elena Mercer attend tomorrow's demonstration to answer ownership and continuity questions. I accepted. So, at 7:30 that evening, Dad finally came to my apartment. I saw him through the door camera, holding a leather folder, shoulders hunched, looking older than he had 2 nights earlier. I opened the door but did not invite him in. "Elena," he said, "we need to stop this before the company is damaged." I looked at him. The company was damaged when you let Ryan sell investors something he did not own. He lowered his voice. "Ryan made mistakes. He forged my signature." Dad glanced toward the hallway as if the neighbors were the problem. "Keep your voice down." That told me he still had not understood anything. He held out the leather folder. Inside was a new agreement offering me a consulting title, no voting authority, and $180,000 in exchange for permanently transferring Route Corps to Caldwell Freight. The agreement also required me to waive all claims connected to prior documentation irregularities. I looked up. "Did your lawyer write this?" Dad's silence answered. "You knew the assignment was fake," I said. "So," he rubbed a hand over his face. I knew Ryan had created something to calm the investors. I did not know the details. I felt the last piece of loyalty I had carried for him become very quiet. And instead of stopping him, you brought me a waiver. Dad's eyes hardened. "This company is bigger than your pride." "No," I said. "It is smaller than your favoritism." I handed the folder back. He did not take it at first, so I placed it on the floor between us. "Tomorrow, Root Corps will do exactly what the contract says. If that embarrasses Ryan, then Ryan should have learned to read." As Dad turned toward the elevator, my phone buzzed with a system alert. Mason Burke had attempted an emergency source code export using the forged assignment as authorization. Junior Living 41. Route Corps blocked the request automatically and preserved the entire session. The investor demonstration had not even started, and Ryan's team had just created the final proof I needed. The investor demonstration began at 8:30 the next evening in Caldwell Freight's Executive Conference Center, a glass-walled room overlooking the dispatch floor where dozens of Root Corps screens tracked trucks across the Midwest. Ryan stood at the front beside a massive display, wearing the same Navy suit from the anniversary gala and the confidence of a man who still believed presentation could outrun proof. Dad sat with the board. Mason hovered near the technical console, and 3 investors occupied the first row alongside Evelyn Shaw from North Star Medical. I entered with Naomi and took the seat Evelyn had reserved for us, which caused Ryan's smile to tighten before he recovered. "Thank you all for coming," he began. "Tonight we will demonstrate Caldwell Freight's proprietary technology platform and its readiness for national licensing." Naomi quietly placed our evidence binder on the table. I did not interrupt him, because the fastest way to expose a false claim is to let the person make it clearly in front of the right witnesses. Ryan moved through the opening slides smoothly. He described Root Corps' routing engine, compliance alerts, and medical chain protocol as if he had designed them himself, while Mason clicked through diagrams copied from my old training materials. Then Evelyn asked the first real question. Who owns the source code? Ryan answered without hesitation. Caldwell Freight owns it outright. Naomi wrote down the exact time. Evelyn followed with, Then why does our contract identify Mercer Systems as licensor? Ryan glanced toward Dad, then said, That language reflects an outdated internal structure. I opened the binder, but kept it closed. The point was not to rescue him from the contradiction. It was to let the investors hear him create it. At 8:44, the 72-hour review window expired. The screen behind Ryan refreshed, and the full administrative dashboard disappeared. Basic truck locations remained active, along with safety alerts and current delivery routing. But the expansion tools, licensing controls, analytics modules, and source-level functions were replaced by a gray notice. Administrative rights restricted under Section 11.4, pending license continuation agreement. Mason clicked frantically, then tried a second account. The same notice appeared. Ryan forced a laugh and said, We're experiencing a temporary display issue. Evelyn looked at me. Is this a system failure? I answered calmly. No. It is the contract functioning exactly as written. Operational safety remains active, but the company's administrative rights were restricted after my termination without cause. One investor leaned forward and asked Ryan, Did you know this would happen? He said. Elena planted a kill switch. Naomi opened the first folder. There is no kill switch. Here is the signed license agreement, executed 7 years ago by Mr. Caldwell, including the provision triggered by Miss Mercer's termination. Dad stared at his signature, while Ryan insisted the agreement had been superseded. That was when he produced the forged intellectual property assignment. He slid it across the table and said, This resolves ownership. Elena transferred the software 4 years ago. Naomi did not touch the document at first. Are you formally relying on that assignment before the board, investors, and North Star Medical? Ryan looked at Dad, then answered, Yes. Naomi placed the forensic report beside it. She explained that the PDF had been created 11 days earlier, that my signature image had been copied from an unrelated vendor approval, and that the file metadata identified Mason Burke as the author. The room went silent. Mason stepped back from the console and said, Ryan told me legal had approved it. Ryan turned on him. You created the file. Mason answered, Because you sent me the old signature and told me your father needed something for investors. Dad closed his eyes. And for the first time in my life, Ryan looked less like the golden child and more like a man standing alone with his own decisions. Evelyn asked for the source export attempt next. Naomi handed her the preserved root core session log showing Mason's failed effort to copy proprietary code using the forged assignment as authorization. Then she provided Ryan's email, instructing Talia to alter access records, and Mason's reply offering to recreate the report manually. One investor removed his glasses and said, You represented that this platform was cleanly owned and ready for licensing. Instead, we have disputed ownership, a forged transfer, an attempted code export, and pressure to alter audit logs. Ryan stood abruptly. This is a family dispute being exaggerated by a bitter former employee. I finally looked directly at him. You fired me publicly, claimed my software, forged my signature, lied to clients, and tried to change the logs. None of those actions required my bitterness. Dad said my name in a warning tone, but Evelyn stopped him. Mr. Caldwell, did you know the assignment was not genuine? Dad's face collapsed. He admitted Ryan had created temporary documentation to calm investors and that he had later asked me to sign a permanent transfer and waive claims. That answer ended whatever remained of the room's confidence. The lead investor closed his folder and announced that all negotiations were suspended pending independent legal and technical review. Northstar issued immediate notice that it would begin its contractual transition assessment because Caldwell Freight had materially misrepresented ownership. The board chair ordered Ryan and Mason to